From the Oklahoma newsroom, this is an OU update. I'm Jenny Carlson. Pop passes have become almost a bad word in Norman, at least if you talk to Mike Stoops. Ryan Aber joins us on the phone. And Ryan, the pop pass came up last year a couple times, especially against Kansas State. Mike Stoops really got fired up about it. Sounds like he still is, huh?
Yeah, no doubt about that. He was fired up about it, in the weeks following that Kansas State game, especially the play that Gronkowski scored the long touchdown on. They felt like there was a Kansas State lineman that was too far down the field. Now, Walt Anderson gave us a talk at Big 12 Media Days last month and said that play was called correctly. He pointed out a couple of different plays in that same game that weren't, but that hasn't lessened Mike Stoops' fervor for the issue, and basically said earlier this week when we asked him that it's an offensive world and defensive guys just have to get used to it because they're not going to make any rules that help us.
Woe is us defensive coaches. The pop pass, by the way, just to remind people, that's where the quarterback takes the snap, sort of takes off like he's going to run the ball. The offensive linemen start downfield to block, but then quarterback holds up before he gets to the line of scrimmage and throws a little pass over the top. Lots of times the issue with defensive coaches, defensive players, is that those linemen who are blocking for a running play are beyond that limit of yards beyond the line of scrimmage that they're supposed to be, should be called, sometimes doesn't get called. And that's sort of where Mike Stoops and other coaches get a little bit fired up. But as you mentioned, Ryan, I mean, Oklahoma has run some pop passes. Oklahoma State likely to as well. It's really rampant. It's not like it's just a K-State or Baylor or a TCU thing. Everybody seems to be doing it nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw it first sort of burst on the scene with Tim Tebow, and he was a young player when he would come in for those, situational plays when he was backing up Chris Leak, and that was his bread and butter, was that little pop pass. And now a lot of teams are doing it. Like you said, OU did it. They did it and scored in that Kansas State game. But it is difficult for especially the linebackers and DBs, because the rule is 3 yards. In the NFL, it's 1. It's a whole lot easier for officials to call and for defensive players to read in the NFL. And it's really difficult to tell, well, they're 3 yards, and it's got to be when the ball is released. So it's tough because Mike Stoops said, we've been hammering into our defensive guys that when you see a lineman get past that 3-yard bubble, that it's going to be a run play, and to really crash down hard on that. And if you do that, you leave the field wide open behind you. And obviously that's been an issue for not only OU's defense, but it's an issue for defenders trying to stop this play, which is why it's become so prominent.
Well, and Ryan, you mentioned earlier Walt Anderson, and we heard him at Big 12 Media Day talk about this, and they thought about potentially changing that rule about how far linemen can get off the line of scrimmage, decided not to. Sounds like, though, this may continue to be a rules issue that comes up if you continue to see more and more offenses that do this. At least I would assume that defensive coaches would continue to bring this up.
Oh, yeah. Defensive coaches will no doubt keep bringing it up. The problem is the offensive coaches are going to want to keep it in. Guys like, Gus Malzahn, guys like Gary Patterson and Art Briles and those guys, they're going to want their offensive guys to get as much advantage as possible. And that's where the problem lied. It was in the coaches. The officials absolutely would love to see the 1-yard rule because it's so much easier to call 1 yard versus 3 yards for them. But it's going to be a fight for sure.
Any chance we could see Mike Stoops and Lincoln Riley like arm wrestling to try to see which side Oklahoma wants to come down on the pop pass?
Yeah, I think OU, despite Bob Stoops' defensive background, I think they're going to come down on the offensive side of that when it's all said and done, regardless of what Mike Stoops feels about it. It's just the reality of football right now.
Poor Mike Stoops. He can't even get support from his own brother. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.